The vast, sun-drenched plains of South Africa bore witness to a clash of empires in the late 19th century. The First Anglo-Boer War, fought between 1880 and 1881, pitted the might of the British Empire against the tenacity of the Boers. The Boers, also known as Afrikaners, were descendants of Dutch settlers who had arrived in South Africa in the 17th century. They were a hardy and independent people, fiercely protective of their way of life and their newly established republics in the Transvaal and the Orange Free State. This conflict, though brief, cast a long shadow over the region. It sowed the seeds for future conflicts and shaped the destiny of South Africa for generations to come. The First Anglo-Boer War was more than just a military conflict. It was a clash of cultures, of ideologies, and of aspirations. The British, at the height of their imperial power, sought to consolidate their control over southern Africa. They saw the mineral-rich territories controlled by the Boers as vital to their strategic and economic interests. The Boers, on the other hand, were determined to maintain their independence and their control over their own destinies. They were prepared to fight and die, if necessary, for their right to self-determination. The war was characterized by its stark contrasts. The British Army, a professional force equipped with the latest weaponry, faced a determined but poorly equipped Boer force. The Boers, however, had one crucial advantage: their intimate knowledge of the terrain. They were masters of guerrilla warfare, using their mobility and marksmanship to deadly effect against the larger, less agile British forces. The war would be a brutal and bloody affair, with heavy losses on both sides. The First Anglo-Boer War stands as a pivotal moment in South African history. It marked the beginning of a protracted struggle for control of the region, a struggle that would culminate in the Second Anglo-Boer War just 2 decades later. The conflict had far-reaching consequences, not only for the Boers and the British, but for the indigenous African populations caught in the crossfire. It remains a poignant reminder of the human cost of colonialism and the enduring legacy of conflict. The roots of the First Anglo-Boer War can be traced back to the early 19th century. The Cape Colony, originally established by the Dutch East India Company in the 17th century, had fallen under British control during the Napoleonic Wars. The arrival of the British in large numbers, coupled with their policies of Anglicisation and the abolition of slavery in 1834, created deep resentment among the Boers. Many Boers, seeking to escape British rule and preserve their way of life, embarked on a series of migrations known as the Great Trek. The Great Trek, which began in the 1830s, saw thousands of Boers, known as voortrekkers, move inland with their families and possessions. They braved harsh conditions, hostile indigenous tribes, and the vast distances of the interior to establish their own independent republics, free from British interference. These republics, the South African Republic, also known as the Transvaal, and the Orange Free State, became symbols of Boer independence and self-reliance. The discovery of diamonds in Griqualand West in the 1860s and gold in the Transvaal in the 1880s dramatically altered the political and economic landscape of southern Africa. These discoveries attracted a flood of fortune seekers, adventurers, and opportunists, many of them British subjects, eager to exploit the region's mineral wealth. The British government, eager to secure these riches for the empire, began to exert increasing pressure on the Boer republics. British expansionism and Boer determination to maintain their independence created a volatile mix. The British saw the Boer republics as an obstacle to their ambitions of a united South Africa under British rule. The Boers, for their part, saw British actions as a threat to their very existence. The stage was set for a confrontation that would have far-reaching consequences. The discovery of diamonds near the confluence of the Vaal and Orange rivers in the 1860s and the subsequent diamond rush brought the simmering tensions between the British and the Boers to a boil. The territory, known as Griqualand West, was claimed by both the Boers and the Griqua people, a mixed-race group led by a Griqua chief. The British, seeing an opportunity to assert their authority and gain control of the lucrative diamond fields, annexed Griqualand West in 1871. The Boers, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, were forced to accept British annexation, but their resentment grew. The discovery of gold in the Transvaal in the 1880s further fueled British ambitions and Boer anxieties. The gold rush transformed the Transvaal, previously a predominantly rural and agricultural republic, into a magnet for fortune seekers and adventurers from across the globe. The influx of Uitlanders, as these newcomers were known, many of them British, dramatically altered the demographic balance of the Transvaal. The Boers, outnumbered and fearing for their cultural and political dominance, became increasingly wary of British intentions. The British government, under the leadership of Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, viewed the Transvaal's gold as a vital asset that needed to be brought under British control. Sir Theophilus Shepstone, the British Secretary for Native Affairs in Natal, was dispatched to the Transvaal in 1877 with secret instructions to annex the Republic. Shepstone, exploiting the Transvaal's precarious financial position and its vulnerability to attacks from neighbouring African tribes, declared the Transvaal a British colony on April 12, 1877. The British annexation of the Transvaal was met with outrage by the Boers. They saw it as a betrayal of their hard-won independence and a violation of their sovereignty. The annexation sparked a wave of Boer nationalism and a determination to resist British rule. A new generation of Boer leaders emerged, men like Paul Kruger, Piet Joubert and Martinus Wessel Pretorius, who would play pivotal roles in the struggle against British imperialism. Section 4, a line in the sand, the first shots fired at Potchefstroom. The Boer response to the British annexation of the Transvaal was initially one of stunned disbelief, followed by a steely determination to resist. Boer leaders, though divided on the best course of action, understood that they could not allow this act of aggression to stand unchallenged. Petitions were sent to the British government protesting the annexation, but they were ignored. The Boers, realizing that diplomacy had failed, began to prepare for war. In December 1880, a group of Boers, led by Paul Kruger, Pierre Joubert and Martinus Wessel Pretorius, met at Paardekraal, near present-day Krugersdorp. There, they drafted a proclamation declaring the Transvaal's independence from British rule. The die was cast. The First Anglo-Boer War had begun. The first shots of the war were fired on December 16, 1880, at Potchefstroom, a small town in the western Transvaal. A Boer commando under the command of Commandant General Piet Cronje surrounded the British garrison stationed there and demanded their surrender. The British, outnumbered and taken by surprise, had little choice but to comply. The Boer victory at Potchefstroom, though a relatively minor affair, had a significant psychological impact. It emboldened the Boers and demonstrated that the British were not invincible. The Boer victory at Potchefstroom was followed by a series of setbacks for the British. On December 20, 1880, a British army column led by Lieutenant Colonel Anstruther was ambushed and decisively defeated by a Boer force at Bronkhorstspruit. The British, caught out in the open, suffered heavy casualties. The Battle of Bronkhorstspruit sent shockwaves through the British Empire. It demonstrated the Boers' fighting prowess and their ability to inflict heavy losses on the British Army. Section 5, Boer Commandos and British Square, the early clashes of the war. The early stages of the First Anglo-Boer War were characterized by a stark contrast in military tactics and organization. The British Army, a professional force trained for conventional warfare, found itself facing an unconventional enemy in the Boers. The Boers, primarily farmers and frontiersmen, were skilled horsemen and marksmen. They fought in loosely organized units known as commandos, led by elected officers. Their tactics, based on mobility, marksmanship, and their intimate knowledge of the terrain, proved highly effective against the larger, less agile British forces. The British Army, accustomed to fighting in close order formations, found itself vulnerable to the Boers' deadly accurate long-range rifle fire. The Boers, armed with breech-loading rifles, could deliver accurate fire at ranges far exceeding those of the British muzzle-loaders. They would target British officers, easily identifiable by their uniforms and swords, disrupting British command and control. The British, for their part, struggled to adapt to the Boers' guerrilla tactics. Their attempts to engage the Boers in open battle often ended in costly defeats. The Battle of Laing's Neck, fought on January 28, 1881, epitomized the challenges faced by the British Army in the early stages of the war. A British force under the command of Sir George Pomeroy Colley attempted to force its way through Laing's Neck, a mountain pass in northern Natal, in order to relieve the besieged British garrison at Pretoria. The Boers, however, were well positioned in the surrounding hills. They inflicted heavy casualties on the advancing British troops, forcing them to retreat.